at group level also social capital, as in the networks of reciprocity, the level of their belonging to clubs and churches, their volunteer activities and so on. And social solidarity was one that I felt was an important indication of social cohesion. To what extent do these people, to what extent are they able or motivated to get together to create a collective agenda and to act to see that it happens? So these are just examples of, specifically, what did I measure, what did I assess? Were they doing any volunteer work over the last year? How much contact with family, whānau and friends? So some of these things were measured with Likert scales, and a lot of it though was about them just talking. So a lot of it was anecdotal data. So these are the ways in which I measured at time 1 and time 2 for individuals, and then I needed to look at the whole picture for that particular case on a group level, and necessarily at that stage when I was trying to assess how much social cohesion would I say there is at case A versus case B. I believe here I have the evidence assembled in there that demonstrates on a very detailed level that in one case of 2 there was demonstrably more social cohesion. That was case A. I had to grapple with this as well too. How far over time am I?
It's okay.
Part of the process of getting my head around my material was being able to defend and define what I meant by different terms that are kind of slippery. I talked about community, slippery terms, some social capital. It means different things to different people. And I needed to come up with some concept in my head of what did I mean by each of these things and how did they fit together. I felt in the end that this was a defence of my view of things, that what I was measuring at individual and group level was all about connectedness, as explained in the previous schema. That social cohesion creates the conditions for the networks that then sort of spring up, the networks of doing things for one another, helping each other out and volunteering and so on. That these things together create a more diffuse sort of idea of community capital, and that altogether that makes up the capacity, which is more about the resources of a community to mobilise and do stuff for itself. So I needed to do that to sort of map out how I saw these constructs fitting together. So as I've explained, what I ended up with was a lot of material, survey and interview data, 2 locations, over time, and my 2 key constructs, internet connectedness and social cohesion. How did they relate? Now, initially, at time 1, social cohesion was evident, was measured, was accessible, was present across the whole sample. But looking at the sample on a case-by-case basis, it was clearly more evident at case A. For example, well, I'll show you in a moment, there were individuals, key individuals, who were real volunteers. They were doing everything. They were out there. Habitat for Humanity, one of these parents, spending lots of hours building houses. His wife working at school, this kind of thing. Now, interestingly, and this all became evident sort of later in the processing of all this material, I started to think about these individuals who were high internet users, and they sort of started to seem as though they had something in common. They were at case A, mainly, and it was there, towards the end of the study, that these particular individuals, who were high internet users and, I argue, opinion leaders, began to demonstrate social solidarity. They were very committed to seeing that their community internet scheme was going to go on, and they mobilised to ensure, and I know because I've kept in touch with what's happened at that site since then, that what they have done has been pivotal in seeing that what they value very much in the computers in home scheme, that's remaining viable. Now it's interesting on another level, because going back to the model provided by the New Zealand government, that there should be this tripartite contribution, that at Case A it was actually a bit, it wasn't really ideal. There was a big government presence in that Computers in Homes, Housing New Zealand had a very strong presence and a very disruptive, actually, dysfunctional presence. In the end they had to back out and pull away. It was problematic having too much of this. And I only have that in there because, you know, there's some contribution of business interests who provide the recycled computers that go into the community. But on the face of it, you think, oh, well, that's not going to work. Because the government interest, or the exogenous, the external, the top-down agenda predominates. And not only that, but within here we have the schools, Computers in Homes, Housing New Zealand, all zeroing in on this area, which is Clendon in South Auckland, that you probably read about quite often, featuring in poor social statistics. So everyone's in there saying, let's fix this, let's throw everything at it. So what I began to find and read as I was assembling all of this and drawing it together, I looked to the literature of diffusion of innovations and the role of opinion leaders and opinion seekers. And people are sort of returning to these models of diffusion of information, from the media to opinion leaders to others in communities. This is now being returned to in the context of new media technologies. And it seems clear when you look at the internet, for example, which has been described as equivocal or ambiguous. It's something that people grapple with. They are kind of lacking in confidence with it. That they're going to struggle unless there are people there to provide advice and guidance. And certainly in these settings, there was uncertainty. A lot of people just pulled out. And there's not a lot of money in Computers in Homes, so it depends critically on support, mentoring, and what I'm looking at, the social cohesion that makes it all hang together. Peer mentoring is provided by Computers in Homes, so that's kind of part of the whole construct. But, you know, that's an outside thing. What seemed evident was that the mentoring that sort of sprang up amongst people themselves was perhaps more valuable. Now, I just put this one in here, but I haven't got time to even talk about it, but part of the involvement or the importance of opinion leaders in a group situation is that you have this two-step flow of information from media to opinion leaders to the others who are perhaps less interested or less confident. I've more recently seen and heard the argument from Barry Wellman, who's a fascinating individual too, who argues that now with the internet we don't need a two-step flow, that people get their information themselves. They don't need to go to the doctor necessarily, they'll just Google it and find out what's ailing them. So we don't need the intermediary. But I would say, just in arguing this point, that in this type of setting, you do need the opinion leaders, the mentors, those who are going to socially support people's acquisition of knowledge. And certainly these novices appear to need the leader figures. And so we had this opinion leader and seeker dynamic going on. And this all became very fascinating to me. Because the high internet users at Case A, who were opinion leaders, they were volunteering, they were getting things sorted. Maybe it was just serendipity, good fortune, that they happened to be there, you know, in that setting. I would need to do more research or justify much more rigorously to look into why it was in that setting that this dynamic existed. But they featured this thing called public individuation, which is, for an opinion leader, people who are willing to stand up and be counted, stand up and say what they think, share their opinion. And they were like this. Actually, that was the first thing I noticed about them in the interviewing, and I think looking at my internet connectedness data, oh, these people are, pretty high-end users. They were very talkative. They were very communicative. They had, as a result, interpersonal influence. So what we find, looking at some of the literature, Barry Rollman again, with his co-researcher, I think his name's Kevin Hampton, who did a lot of studies, and still do, but in Toronto, in a wide suburb that they call Neckville. Lots and lots and lots of wonderful, rich research and guidance there that was helpful to me, and their conclusions were back in 2001 that it's those who are already engaged, people who are already communicative, who increasingly use the internet as an additional tool. So there seems to be some connection between sociability, confidence and internet use. Same point made by Loder and Keeble. Those who are socially content, trust others, have lots of people to draw on, etc., are also more likely to be wired. Results of the present study suggest that this is, granted this is a small sample, but it's a very in-depth and rigorously conducted study, that those individuals in a group setting showing high levels of engagement, high sociability and trust, high connectors, may function as opinion leaders among those who are tentative about an equivocal though compelling technology. These people, these individuals, about 4 or 5 of them, showed enthusiasm for internet as an additional media tool. They managed it strategically. One of them was setting up a home business. It was that kind of, oh, here's this unmissable opportunity, and they fell upon the technology for what it could give them. This ready ability to manage the medium for what it could offer may have helped them to also build on their social connectedness. I'll miss that point. It's just saying that opinion leaders in an equivocal technology setting also use a lot of other media, and that's demonstrated in some of the most recent data coming out, such as the 2009 point that changing news reading habits show a large increase in time reading online. This is the kind of thing I saw even a few years prior with these opinion leader figures. So I was coming to an interesting conclusion with that, and I feel that it's supportive in the information that I assembled. It does need further follow-up in order to demonstrate the replicability of the principle. Was it just a one-off? Was it coincidental? I don't think so. They were, I'll just identify 4 of them there, they were neighbourly and networked. I could tell you more about that, I've got it all written here, but no time. They knew lots of people. They had, extensive networks. They were well known, they were out there, they were at meetings, sharing their opinions. They used the internet readily, and substantial consumers of other media. I had that, I've got that information. Their leader attributes, this is where I started. I started to notice these things. Oh, this is interesting. What does this tell me? All of these characteristics were shared. And therefore they had a very powerful role to play in case A. They started to mobilise and leverage what they could in order to see that for a new generation of parents and families that didn't have the internet at home, they wanted to see that that would be continued.